Hey guys, before you say anything, yes, I know I look tired. I was gonna try to put some makeup on, but I said, never mind, I ain't even gonna try to hide it. Right now I'm in transition. It'll level out in about a week, so more videos will be able to be put out and I won't look so tired. But as it stands, I'm working as a cake decorator, or starting to train for one, at the bakery department in Safeway in the morning, and then afterwards going to this incredible, the Old Oak Oven Pizza. It's a pizza cart here in Silverton, and if you live in Silverton, you know how badass it is and delicious. So yeah, a little tired, but I love you guys, so I didn't want to not continue with this awesome book, and may it be helpful to whoever needs it whenever it is that you hear this message. Continuing on with Refuge Recovery, The Buddhist Path to Recovering from Addiction by Noah Levine. We're continuing on with part 2. Yesterday we heard Mary's story, and today we're going to hear Pablo's. Now, as a reminder, the reflections on recovery is what part 2 of this book is about. The following are personal recovery stories from members of our Refuge Recovery community. We have included these stories for those new to recovery to get a sense of the various ways in which recovery happens. You are not alone in your suffering, your confusion, or your path of healing and recovery. And Kina is here to say hello. Here we go. Pablo's story, or Pablo. Buddhist practice is, in and of itself, not only totally sufficient to establish and maintain long-term sobriety, but designed precisely to pinpoint and overcome its causes. For me, this isn't just philosophy, it's how I live my life. I'm an unusual case. My sobriety was established on Buddhist principle and practice alone, as a founding member of the New York City Dharma Punks community. And for those that don't know, Dharma Punks, spelled P-U-N-X, is also a book that Noah Levine, the author of this book, wrote. So that's what they're talking about. As a founding member of the New York City Dharma Punks community, which featured a high concentration of people in recovery, I had the luxury of a community of people in mid-transformation who all credited sobriety as part of their spiritual work. But early in my recovery, I realized that Alcoholics Anonymous, though an effective system for many people, and I'll pause here to say no disrespect intended in any way, I also myself went to those rooms, both AA and NA, for NA purposes. But early in my recovery, I realized that Alcoholics Anonymous, though an effective system for many people, would not be a match for me. For me also, I left the rooms for that reason, for my own reasons, I should say. For me, going to the rooms, which is why I switched to AA, even though I belonged in NA. And perhaps it was just the town I lived in, Hemet, Senesino. Going to the NA meetings made me more anxious for drugs than anything else. People were typically sketched out. Hemet is very known for methamphetamine, which was my addiction at the time, back then. Thank God it's back then now. But yeah, I would just get sketchy going in there. So I switched to AA. It felt a lot better. People were a lot cooler to be around, and they were usually older and more refined in a way, I guess I should say. Not to insult anybody, but if anyone else had that similar experience, they know I'm not joshing or talking smack. It's just how it was. I ended up going clean by leaving the place, the people, and the things. Like I moved out of state. My whole life was completely destroyed, and I started over. That's how I did it. But early in my recovery, I realized that Alcoholics Anonymous, though an effective system for many people, would not be a match for me. It didn't need to be, because the Dharma Punks community and its Buddhist practices would prove sufficient. My addiction story begins at 12 years old, when I realized I was gay. I was terrified. This was the early 1980s, and I lived in a small military town in the Mojave Desert of California. There was no Glee on television. In fact, the only gay person I'd ever seen on TV was a man on the talk show Donahue who was dying from AIDS. There was no internet or It Gets Better campaign. Queer issues had not in any way penetrated the mainstream. The president, Ronald Reagan, was anti-gay. My father, a violent man who screamed at the top of his lungs nearly every day, was inexplicably homophobic. My friends at school played a game called Smear the Queer during lunch breaks. Being gay in this country, in my town, in my home, made me a target. The conscious realization that I was gay lasted only a few moments. It was immediately overridden by some protective part of my psyche that said, "There's no way I'm ever telling anybody this." I literally didn't think about my sexuality until I was 19. Nevertheless, it was precisely at that point that the world moved from being a safe place to a profoundly unsafe one for me. I was now vulnerable to being disowned, ostracized, or worse, the target of violence. Because I had no authentic self-expression, I had no authentic connection, which left me with deep feelings of isolation. I now know from my 3 years working at a suicide prevention line for LGBTQ teens that these are the reasons why they want to kill themselves. It's also why queer people have a disproportionate incidence of addiction issues when compared to the general population. Without the agency of authentic self-expression, a lifelong pattern of coping through avoidance, denial, and escape emerges. I'm going to repeat that last sentence because it's so powerful and impactful and so true. Without the agency of authentic self-expression, a lifelong pattern of coping through avoidance, denial, and escape emerges. This turning away from pain is the primary movement of the addictive process, one that Buddhism so boldly corrects. The dual event of my mother's death from cancer and my younger friend Matthew's death in a bus accident when I was 19 destabilized me very deeply, because I was raised an atheist by a father who said that anyone who believed in God was a fucking idiot. I had no notion of heaven or reincarnation. Death seemed like annihilation. To me, life was being trapped between that void and an unsafe, violent, and scary world. By the time I turned 22, I had already witnessed 3 murders and 1 attempted murder on 3 separate occasions. 2 kids were shot in the head at a rave I attended. I had to walk past their bodies to get out. On another occasion, I found a homeless man in an alleyway. He had been staked and set on fire. I found a homeless man in an alleyway. He had been staked and set on fire, and once 3 men drove up to my neighbor's house looking for a man. When they couldn't find him, they shot his wife through her upstairs window. I remember seeing her several weeks later. Her jaw was caved in, deformed. The images of what I saw continue to haunt me to this day. I began to have panic attacks daily, which persisted for more than a decade. Violent images would, and still do, haunt my mind. My siblings were all much older than me, and they were spread out all over the country, so I had little contact with them. I felt abandoned, completely on my own to grieve and figure things out. I literally kept my experience to myself, confiding in no one, partly because I had no model for it, partly because to do so would make the experiences real. At the time, my fragile sanity depended on avoidance, turning away, not toward. The traumas prompted a deep internal upheaval in me, which reawakened my conflict about my sexual orientation. Eventually, I came out. My brothers and sisters were largely supportive, but my father disowned me. I spoke to him maybe 2 more times in passing before his death in 2001. My drinking was more than a move away from pain. I jumped ship completely. The pain of being home, quote unquote, in this body, heart, and mind was so unbearable that I abandoned myself completely and stayed gone for 13 years. When the cost/benefit analysis of drinking moved too firmly into the cost category, I knew I had to stop. When I did, all the pain was there on the other side, waiting to finally be tended to. Drinking hadn't worked. Like most people who decide to get sober, I was brought to Alcoholics Anonymous. While AA certainly worked for others, its core proposition felt irreconcilable with my own experiences. I couldn't, for example, rectify the assertion that alcoholism is a disease with the facts of my own life. The idea that by simply attending an AA meeting without any consultation, one is expected to take on a blanket diagnosis of diseased addict was to me at best patronizing, at worst irresponsible. Wow, I have to agree. At best, patronizing. At worst, irresponsible. Irresponsible because it doesn't encourage people to turn towards and heal the actual underlying causes of their abuse of substance. Again, I completely agree. It's so well stated. I drank for 13 years for really good reasons. Among them were unprocessed grief, parental abandonment, isolation, violent trauma, anxiety and panic, social oppression, a general lack of safety, deep existential discord, and tremendous diet and lifestyle imbalances, none of which constituted a disease, and all of which manifested a profound internal, mental, emotional, and physical discomfort, which I sought to escape by taking external substances. It is only through one's own efforts to turn towards life on its own terms and to develop a wiser relationship to what's there through a mindfulness and compassion that makes freedom from addictive patterns possible. My sobriety has been sustained by facing life, processing grief, healing family relationships, accepting radically the fact of social oppression, working with my abandonment conditioning, coming into community, renegotiating trauma, making drastic diet and lifestyle changes, forgiving, and practicing mindfulness, to name just a few. Through these things, I began to relieve the very pressure that compulsive behaviors are an attempt to resolve. This fact calls into question another of the core philosophies of AA, powerlessness. I'm really liking this section here, because it's true. I felt that too when I went to those meetings. In AA, I heard about how no human power could relieve our alcoholism. Only God could. But we're part and parcel of God, and He expects great things from us. So, boom. Did you see those lights light up right now? That was awesome, Dex. You did that on perfect cue. Only God could once we sought Him out. But if you experience addiction as I do, as a habitual movement away from pain towards pleasure or numbing, then you see clearly that overcoming addiction depends on cultivating the capacity to be present for pain and to work to reduce its causes. The only person who has the power to do that is you. Your teachers, books, and statues can't do it for you, and God certainly doesn't do it. He gives you the power to do it yourself. But you got to believe in yourself. And how I came to believe in myself was because I recognized God as my ultimate creator, and I recognized that I was loved infinitely and without doubt. I was a child of God. I could do anything. I will continue to drive my life in a positive direction. Is that, for me personally, that is the push forward. So I think it gets there. Everybody has a different way up that mountain, remember? I was raised an atheist and came into sobriety without any evidence to sway me from the powerful conditioning of my upbringing. Though I no longer identify as an atheist, believing in God when I was growing up in a country that relentlessly oppressed queer people in the name of God was unrealistic. And the idea of having to now adopt a belief in God to stay sober was insulting. More important, it just didn't seem to have anything to do with establishing and maintaining sobriety. If anything, struggling with the God concept is a distraction from what's actually relevant. A belief in God is absolutely not necessary to stay sober. For me, all of what is necessary to know and practice for successful long-term sobriety is contained within the Four Noble Truths. My friend and teacher, Stephen Batchelor, taught me to think of the Four Noble Truths not as a proposition to believe, but rather as tasks to be accomplished. Thinking of the truths as four tasks makes them practical, makes them a practice. Practicing or living the Four Noble Truths can be critically important for someone interested in Buddhist recovery. The task of the first Noble Truth is to fully know suffering. Practically speaking, this means we stop running from pain and do precisely the opposite. We turn towards it and study it and our relationship to it. It means we abandon the delusion that our lives can be all pleasant and no pain. Instead, we acknowledge our lives as a balance of what is beautiful, pleasant, and awe-inspiring, and what is unpleasant, painful, and outright traumatizing. That good food, sex, nature, love, and connection are balanced by disease, abandonment, hurricanes, war, and suicide. In this turning around, we become grounded, sensitive, and responsive to whatever life brings, instead of ungrounded and reactive. We remain unruffled when difficulties come. In fact, we expect them. One of my clients in my wellness and recovery counseling practice made a brilliant observation. He said, "Addiction is the exact opposite of turning towards suffering." He's exactly right. And the teaching of the Four Noble Truths is famously referred to as the middle path, precisely because it's middleness is defined by two extremes we are advised to avoid: the addictive pursuit of sensual pleasure on one side, and self-denial and punishment on the other. Sobriety is a condition that actually makes this turning toward possible. So the task of the first Noble Truth is to expand our awareness, to embrace the full range of life experience, including pain. Inevitably, that damn word, inevitably, yeah. What happens when we expand our awareness is that we start to see our body-mind's built-in tendency to want to get rid of and avoid pain and grasp for and maintain pleasure. These normal internal responses to life are called craving in Buddhism, a term used by addicts all over the world, but one that is profoundly unexplained. I'm going to repeat that because it's so important. So the task of the first Noble Truth is to expand our awareness, to embrace the full range of life experience, including pain. Inevitably, what happens when we expand our awareness is that we start to see our body/mind's built-in tendency to want to get rid of and avoid pain and grasp for and maintain pleasure. These normal internal responses to life are called craving in Buddhism, a term used by addicts all over the world, but one that is profoundly unexplained. The truth of craving is the second Noble Truth. Its task is to let cravings be, as opposed to identifying with and reacting unskillfully to them by drinking and using. When we let them be, they cease, just like everything else in the universe does. They arise, do their dance, and end because they are subject to impermanence. This ceasing is the third noble truth, the truth of cessation. It points to both the ceasing of the craving and the ceasing of the pattern of suffering that is the result of identifying with and reacting to craving. The task is to realize its end. This practice of opening to life on life's terms, of mindfully monitoring the cravings provoked within us as we move through life, while allowing these cravings to arise and pass without the patterned reactivity of addictive behavior, opens up the possibility of a different way of life. This way of life, the fourth noble truth, is a comprehensive system for conscious living. The Eightfold Path addresses the optimal ways to think about the world and what intentions support freedom from suffering and harm. It addresses our conduct, including our relationship to intoxicants, and offers us the appropriate meditative practice in the service of freedom from the causes of addiction. The Eightfold Path acts as a feedback loop to the other three noble truths in that it deepens one's capacity to practice living them. The message of the Four Noble Truths to the addict is this: there's no such thing as a life with no pain, and you no longer have to harm yourself to respond to it, in response to it. And that is Pablo's story. Pablo, wherever you are, we send you love. And to close off, silent prayer for you guys and myself. I love you guys. We'll continue on. And where are we in this book? We're past the middle. That's where. Namaste, guys. Hasta mañana.